The void shrieked silent rage around the crippled hull of the Stardust Drifter. Inside, alarms blared a dissonant chorus, ruby lights washing over the sweat-slicked face of Starship engineer Evan Cross. His hands blurred across the console, a frantic dance on unresponsive controls. Outside, an uncharted nebula churned like disturbed cosmic oil paint, its gravitational currents having snared his vessel. He'd been charting anomalies near Kepler 186, a lone pioneer, chasing whispers of the unknown. Now, the unknown bellowed back. Sparks showered overhead. The ship groaned, a deep structural protest. "Come on, hold together," Evan gritted out, voices strained by adrenaline and failing inertial dampeners. He wrestled the yoke, targeting a pocket of relative stability glimpsed on failing sensors. A world, green and blue, improbable refuge near the nebula's edge. Unregistered, his only chance. Atmospheric entry was an uncontrolled inferno. The drifter, never meant for such stress, shed hull sections like scorched scales. Fire bloomed outside, incandescent plasma licking the viewport. Evan locked himself into the command chair, restraints digging deep. A fleeting thought of Earth. He braced. The impact was cataclysmic sound and force, crushing metal, then merciful silence and shadow. Modification note. Streamlined opening sentences for quicker pacing, varied vocabulary rage, dissonant chorus, disturbed cosmic oil paint, scorched scales to reduce repetition. Consciousness surfaced slowly, like breaching water after a deep dive. The Tastioff copper, a dull throbbing from his left leg, a sharp sting above his eye. Emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows in the wreckage. Ozone and burnt circuits fouled the air. Silence, thick and heavy, broken only by a slow, rhythmic drip. A groan escaped dim as he tried to move. Fire surged up his leg. Mangled console metal pinned his shin. Trapped. Panic flickered. Suppressed by training. Assess. Envirosuit, functional, likely saving him. Ship, scrap. The viewport revealed not stars, but immense, dripping fronds under a dim, viridian glow. Modification note. Varied description of awakening. Used throbbing and sting instead of repeating pain. Shorter sentences for immediacy. Suit comms yielded only static. The emergency beacon remained stubbornly silent, alone, stranded, hurt, survival. Using his good limbs, he strained against the debris pinning him. Metal shrieked, but held. Leverage. His gaze found a sturdy support bar. Reaching was an exercise in controlled agony. Grunting, straining, fighting the gray edge of unconsciousness, he wedged the bar. Metal screamed, then grudgingly shifted just enough. He wrenched his leg free, biting back a cry, tasting blood anew. Badly broken, but intact. Workable. Modification note. Slightly condensed escape sequence, focusing on action. He salvaged essentials, painkillers, disinfectant, synth bandages, multi-tool, purifier, nutrient paste, medkit, laser pistol, charge blessedly full. He treated his wounds swiftly, methodically, the meds reducing the ache to a bearable level. Modification note. Condense inventory list for conciseness. The cockpit door was fused shut, conserving the pistol. He located the emergency release. With a groan of protesting metal and a hiss, it tore open enough to squeeze through. The outside air was a physical presence. Thick, humid, layered with countless unfamiliar scents. Trees with strangely bright bark towered towards a multi-tiered canopy, filtering the unseen daylight into perpetual emerald twilight. Leathery winged flyers darted between branches draped with phosphorescent fungi. Soft moss cushioned the ground. A world beautiful, profoundly strange. and pulsing with latent menace. Man-high ferns unfurled nearby. Flowers bloomed in vibrant, unnatural hues, some pulsing with soft inner light. The air thrummed with unseen life. Modification note. Varied vocabulary for alien and bioluminescent, e.g. strangely bright, phosphorescent, profoundly strange, inner light, focused sensory details. His leg pulsed with protest at every step, but leaning on the salvaged bar as a crutch, he pushed onward. The wreckage was a dangerous beacon. Move. The forest crowded him, dense and watchful. Every rustle, every snapped twig underscored his vulnerability. Hours crawled by in a painful haze. He found a clear stream, the purified water a balm, then choked down tasteless nutrient paste. Modification note. Reduced focus on repeated descriptions of Evan's suffering exhaustion, making the trek feel quicker. As the twilight deepened, the forest's own illumination intensified, eerie blues, greens, soft purples emanating from flora and fungi. Odd calls echoed through the trees. Evan found a shallow overhang beneath immense roots, meager shelter. He cleared the space, checked his pistol again, and huddled, nerves frayed raw. Sleep felt distant, listening to the planet's unfamiliar nocturnal rhythm, his pulse a heavy drum against his ribs. Modification note. Slightly condensed descriptions of the resting stop and environment. He must have drifted off, because a prickling awareness snapped him awake. Something nearby, motionless, straining his ears. A low growl, deeper than before, resonant, carrying a disturbing vibration. Intelligence? He reached cautiously for the pistol. Eyes materialized in the gloom. Pairs of brilliant amber orbs, watching from the forest edge. Moving with fluid, predatory grace, circling silently. Shapes resolved, tall, bipedal, powerfully muscled under thick dark fur. Wolfish muzzles, alert pointed ears. Obsidian-tipped spears glinted faintly. Velari. The fragmented data whispered warnings. Dominant. Fierce. Territorial. Modification note. Varied golden eyes to amber orbs. Used brilliant instead of luminous. Slightly quicker reveal of the Velari Evans heart, hammered. He slowly raised empty hands, a gesture likely meaningless. The figures paused, their keen eyes narrowed. One, larger, broader, stepped forward. No spear, but an aura of undeniable command radiated from him. Charcoal and silver fur, his gaze holding shrewd, ancient calculation. Rovek, the name echoed from data fragments. Brutal, modification note, emphasized Rovek's commanding presence. Rovek barked a sharp order. Two Velari advanced, spears leveled purposefully. Evan tensed, grip tightening on the concealed pistol. Fight? Suicide? Surrender? To what? Before he could choose, another figure emerged, startlingly swift and silent. Leaner, sable-furred, her movements a blend of lethal grace and contained power. Her gaze, sharp and unsettlingly intense, held not just appraisal, but an assessing curiosity that seemed to pierce through his fear. A curved knife rested at her hip. Adornments of polished bone and iridescent feathers were woven near her pointed ears. Kayla, alpha huntress. Powerful, are respected. Modification note. Varied Kayla's description slightly. Emphasized the intensity of her gaze. She stopped between Evan and the warriors, raising a hand, palm out. Addressed Rovek in short, guttural sounds. He snarled, jabbing a thick claw towards Evan, then pointedly at Kayla, his expression darkening with possessive implication. Kayla turned her head slowly, her keen gaze sweeping over Evan, the makeshift bandage, the ruined suit, the exhaustion etched deep. Pure assessment, yet perhaps tinged with something else. Recognition, a flicker of concern. Modification note. Added Rovek's gesture towards Kayla along with Evan, providing the first subtle hint for the later twist regarding lineage status. She knelt beside Evan, the proximity unsettling, her scent a clean mix of pine resin, damp earth, and something fundamentally wild. Her long fingers, dark claws retracted, hovered near his injured leg. He flinched involuntarily. Her eyes met his, a silent question within their amber depths. Her gaze shifted upward, toward his collar near his ear. He felt the itch, dried blood and grime smeared there from the gash on his forehead. Instinctively, a clumsy, half-conscious attempt perhaps to appear less abject, less broken, he reached up. His fingers brushed the delicate tip of Kayla's pointed sable ear, intendingly to flick away a fleck of clinging forest soil. The reaction was electric, terrifying. Kayla went utterly rigid, as if struck by lightning. A low, primal growl resonated deep in her chest, profoundly different from any sound before. Her sharp eyes widened, fixed on his, shock, disbelief, and something like awe mingled with sacred violation. The warriors gasped, a collective, sibilant hiss. Spears snapped instantly back to deadly readiness. Rovek roared, stepping forward menacingly, fangs bared, a predatory light entering his eyes directed not just at the human intruder, but possessively towards Kayla herself. Modification note. Deepened Kayla's reaction awe mingled with sacred violation, added the possessive element to Rovek's reaction again, reinforcing the twist hint. Evan snatched his hand back as if burned, mind scrambling. An accident? What did I do? Kayla rose slowly, towering over him. Not merely angry, stunned, shaken to her core. She stared at him, then raised her own hand, delicately touching the brushed ear tip as if confirming a shocking reality. She looked at Rovek, who was practically vibrating with fury, and spoke a single, sharp word imbued with undeniable authority. It commanded obedience, silencing Rovek's snarl, though his burning glare remained locked in Evan, now laced with frustrated ambition. She faced Evan again, her expression unreadable, perhaps deeply troubled beneath the composed surface. She spoke again, her voice a low, resonant contralto, the strange words heavy with finality. Something irrevocable had occurred. Pointing deliberately, him, her ear, herself. Him. Bound. The data fragment flashed with sudden, chilling clarity. Touch. Sacred bonding ritual. Irreversible. Spirit link initiated. Not simple mating, as he'd initially feared. Something far deeper, more fundamental. Binding life forces, clan status, weaving destinies together. He'd accidentally triggered an ancient, sacred law, linking himself intrinsically to the alpha huntress in ways he couldn't possibly comprehend. Modification note. Immediately specified spirit link and its deeper meaning, reinforcing the gravity. Rovek radiated focused animosity. The warriors waited uneasily, caught between their leader's fury and their huntress's apparent claim. Kayla stood resolute, an unexpected shield. She addressed Rovek again, the exchange sharp, guttural. He argued vehemently, gesturing towards Evan with contempt, then back to Kayla with raw possessive anger. She responded calmly, firmly, asserting her status, her lineage, the tradition now unavoidably invoked upon her and her line. With a final frustrated growl that echoed through the damp air, Rovek seemed to concede, spitting contemptuously near Evan's feet before stalking off into the shadows, his warriors following, casting wary glances back at the impossible pairing. Modification note reinforced Rovek's potential motivation tied to Kayla's status lineage through his actions and her assertion, strengthening the twist hint. Silence fell again, thick with unspoken questions. Kayla faced Evan, exasperation now mingling with a grim acceptance. Shek knelt, repeated the gestures slowly, deliberately. Him, her ear, her, him, linked. He shook his head desperately, hands raised. No, he tried uselessly. The English words lost. Mistake. Accident. I didn't mean. Kayla tilted her head, seeming to grasp the essence of his panic. A faint sigh, almost human, escaped her. She gestured towards the surrounding dark forest, then made a sharp, definitive slicing motion across her own throat, before pointing unequivocally at him. Without this link, Rovek ensures your death. The meaning was brutally undeniable. Then she offered her hand, palm up, claws fully retracted. An invitation, perhaps, but one bound to a terrifying unintended commitment. Hesitantly, acutely aware of his utter dependence, Evan placed his hand in hers. Her grip was firm, unexpectedly warm, the texture of her palm slightly rough, like worn leather. She helped him stand, careful of his injury. They moved deeper into the phosphorescent forest, Kayla navigating the treacherous terrain with an innate predatory awareness, occasionally pointing out toxic plants or camouflaged pitfalls Evan would have blundered into. Hours passed in a heavy silence, thick with unspoken complexities. They reached a vast cavern, hidden behind a shimmering waterfall curtain, the cascade throwing off aqueous light. Inside, the roar was muted. It was warm, dry, lit by pillars emitting a steady, cool blue radiance. Intricate carvings covered the walls, detailed scenes of hunts, complex rituals, and recurring over and over, a complex spiral symbol Evan didn't recognize, often depicted near regal-looking Velari figures holding staffs. The air held the mingled scents of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the wild musk of the Velari. Modification note. Added the specific detail of the recurring spiral symbol Evan notices in the carvings, planting another seed for the twist. Dozensov Velari turned as they entered, their brilliant gazes fixing immediately on the outsider. A low murmur rippled through the cavern. Hostility radiated from many, mirroring Rovek's earlier fury. Others watched with cocked heads, merely curious. Rovek stood near a large central fire pit, arms crossed over his massive chest, his glare unwavering and intense. Kayla ignored the stairs, leading Evan purposefully towards a raised platform, where three elders sat, their fur streaked with gray, faces deeply lined, their eyes holding the steady weight of long authority. They wore cloaks of iridescent pelts and held staffs intricately carved from dark, gnarled wood. Modification note. Subtly condensed cavern description. Maintained focus on reactions. Kayla spoke respectfully but firmly, recounting the events in the forest, gesturing towards Evan, then touching her ear again meaningfully. Grave silence greeted her report. The elders scrutinized Evan, their ancient eyes seeming to weigh his spirit, not just his physical presence. Rovek interrupted, his voice harsh and accusatory. He argued long and forcefully against Kayla's implicit protection, his gaze flickering towards the dominant spiral carvings in the far wall when mentioning Kayla's duty and the integrity of her line. The crowd murmured in agreement with some of his points, their hostility towards the alien palpable. Modification note. Explicitly linked Rovek's argumento the carvings and Kayla's lineage duty, making the twist hint stronger and more deliberate. Kayla waited patiently for him to finish, then responded, her voice ringing with conviction. She spoke of inviolable tradition, of the sign Evan had inadvertently made, accidental or not. She spoke of her status, her right to choose who shared the implications of the link, implicitly staking her considerable reputation on this fragile, unintended bond. It was a defense born clearly of principle, of adherence to ancient laws Rovek seemed eager to twist. The eldest of the three, a female whose fur was almost entirely silver, raised a wizened hand, silencing the cavern instantly. She spoke, her voice raspy with age but carrying undeniable weight. Tradition, however strangely invoked, must be respected. The spirit link, once initiated, was a matter of deep consequence, especially for Kayla's ancient line. It could not be ignored. However, the outsider, the human named Evan Cross, was weak, untested, clearly not of the Velari way. Acceptance, therefore, must be earned. Modification note, added the elder, explicitly confirming the significance of the link specifically to Kayla's line, further reinforcing the twist's foundation. The decree was delivered. Evan would be given 3 cycles of the twin moons, roughly 3 Velmorran days, to prove his worth. Not necessarily as Amit, she clarified, eyeing them both shrewdly, but as someone worthy of the clan's protection, someone who could contribute, someone who was not merely a burden or a threat spawned by accident. He would face trials, tests of strength, endurance, and spirit. He would work, he would learn, he would endure. If, at the end of the 3 cycles, he had failed to demonstrate his value, he would be cast out into the perilous wilds, his fate left to the planet itself, which, Evan knew instinctively, was a death sentence. Kayla inclined her head in solemn acceptance. Rovek smirked, clearly confident the weak human would never survive. Dread warred with a stubborn spark of determination within Evan. 3 days. Prove himself to powerful beings whose language he didn't speak, whose intricate customs he barely grasped, on a world actively trying to kill him. He met the eldest elder's penetrating gaze with as much fragile resolve as he could muster. He had survived a starship crash. He had faced the unknown terrors of the jungle night. He wouldn't give up now. His life, perhaps Kyla's honor, and the unseen weight of this inexplicable bond depended on it. Day 1 dawned before the cavern's dim light shifted fully from the deep blues of night to the pervasive greenish hues of day. Roused by a nudge, Evan accepted a crude wooden bowl filled with a steaming, nutty-smelling gray porridge from Kalen, the same young Velari male from the night before. It was bland but filling, providing much-needed energy. His leg felt marginally better after a night's rest on surprisingly soft furs, though still stiff and aching. Kayla appeared shortly after, carrying fresh bandages made from broad, fibrous leaves and a pungent salve that smelled sharply of herbs and mud. She knelt and expertly redressed his wound without comment, her touch surprisingly gentle despite her formidable claws. It felt like duty, a responsibility accepted. Modification note, added Kalen's name immediately, confirming his identity early. The first trial was simple, brutal labor. He was assigned to help haul massive logs from the forest edge back to the cavern, timbers used for reinforcing structures and fueling the central fire. The logs were easily thick as Evan's torso, yet Velari teams of 4 or 5 maneuvered them, with coordinated brute strength and thick ropes woven from plant fibers. Evan was put with a group supervised by a grizzled older male named Boren, whose face bore the raised, silvery scars of countless battles or hunts. Boren regarded Evan with open skepticism. "Watch feet, Scott," Boren grunted, using a Velari word Evan guessed meant outsider or perhaps weakling, heightenedly direct words initially. The humidity, the unfamiliar gravity which felt subtly heavier than Earth standard, and the sheer physical exertion taxed Evan to his limits within the first hour. He slipped constantly on the damp, mossy ground, stumbled over unseen roots, his injured leg sending waves of misery up his body. The other Velari and his work crew offered no help, merely watching his struggles with detached amusement or outright scorn. Rovek made several appearances throughout the day, lingering nearby, a smug, predatory grin fixed on his muzzle as he watched Evan falter repeatedly. Modification note: added minimal, but characterizing dialogue for Borin, including a specific Velari word. Evan refused to quit. He gritted his teeth against the protesting muscles and joint, focused solely on placing one foot in front of the other, on contributing his meager weight to the haul. He learned quickly to anticipate the treacherous terrain, to use leverage rather than just raw, inadequate strength, mimicking the efficient technique she observed. He fell repeatedly, covering himself in mud and sweat, his muscles screaming silently, but each time had dragged himself back up, ignoring the simmering undertone of derision or the pointed growls. Just keep moving. Kayla watched him from a distance for part of the day, her expression typically unreadable from afar. She didn't intervene, didn't offer aid. This was Histus to endure alone. But her silent presence was a strange sort of anchor, a reminder of why he was subjecting himself to this torture. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting not to disgrace the huntress who had, for profound reasons of tradition, he was only beginning to guess at, bound herself somehow to his fate. By the time the dim greenish light began to fade again towards the blues of night, Evan was utterly spent, collapsing onto his furs, every inch of him aching. He barely had the energy to eat the chunk of roasted meat and fibrous tubers offered for the evening meal. Sleep came instantly, deep and dreamless, born of sheer physical exhaustion. Modification note: condensed description of suffering at end of day. The second day brought a different challenge: the gathering of volatile glow sacs from giant subterranean insects known as lumina worms. These delicate sacs provided the cool blue fuel for the cavern's illumination pillars. The task required descending into dark, narrow tunnels beneath the main cavern, navigating by the faint ambient light of endemic fungi, and carefully harvesting the sacs using specialized hook tools without rupturing them or provoking the massive territorial worms. It was dangerous work, requiring stealth, precision, and considerable nerve. Evan was paired again with the young Velari Kalen. In the close confined sand shared potential danger of the tunnels, a grudging sort of communication began to form. Kalen used sharp gestures and clipped Velari words, pointing out hazards. "Skarn!" he'd hiss, indicating loose rock overhead. "Vial!" tapping a patch of slick, phosphorescent slime left by less benign cave dwellers. He demonstrated the delicate technique for extracting the glow sacs with the hook tool. "Tackle," he emphasized. "Careful. Slow." Evan's engineering background unexpectedly gave him an edge here. He had steady hands and a knack for delicate, meticulous work. He moved quietly, followed Kalen's instructions precisely, and managed to harvest several sacs without incident. Once, a huge lumina worm shifted unexpectedly in its burrow ahead, its huge segmented body blocking their passage back. Kalen froze instantly, signaling silence. Evan held his breath, watching the massive creature, its multiple eyes glowing dimly in the oppressive darkness. He noticed a loose cluster of rocks on the ceiling just above the worm, potentially unstable. Thinking quickly, he used his multi-tool's sonic emitter on a low, focused frequency, aiming it carefully at the rocks. The subtle vibration was just enough to dislodge a single small pebble, which clattered down harmlessly near the worm's head section. Startled by the sound and movement, the creature immediately retreated deeper into its burrow, clearing the path. Kalen looked back at Evan, then intently at the multi-tool in his hand, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even nascent respect, in his young eyes. He offered a sharp single nod. Hjallar, clever good, he grunted again, a sound that might have been grudging approval, before gesturing for them to continue their harvest. Modification note. Enhanced Kalen's interaction and dialogue, making him more active and giving Evan a specific moment of cleverness. They returned Toth's main cavern with a respectable haul. Boren inspected their collection, raising a thick furry eyebrow almost imperceptibly at the quantity Evan himself had gathered. Rovek merely scowled from across the cavern, where he conferred with several hulking warriors. Kayla met Evan's gaze briefly as he passed, offering a slight, almost invisible nod acknowledging his success. It was a small victory, but for Evan, exhausted and sore, it felt monumental. He was learning, adapting, contributing. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this impossible trial. That evening, Kayla approached him as he sat near the warmth of the central fire, trying to soothe his aching muscles. She carried 2 steaming bowls of rich stew, handing one to him. She sat beside him, not too close, but companionably silent for a time. Then she began to speak, slowly, patiently, using simple Velari words, pointing to objects and repeating their names clearly. Crag, she said, pointing to the fire. Vorn, gesturing to the savory chunks of meat in the stew. Tal, indicating the cavern wall with its myriad carvings. She pointed to herself. Kayla. She pointed to him. Evan. He repeated the words haltingly, trying his best to mimic her pronunciation, the sound strange and guttural in his human mouth. She corrected impatiently, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of her lips when he finally got a word reasonably right. It was the beginning of communication, a fragile bridge being built across the vast cultural and linguistic divide. He learned the words for Waternal, Sleepersh, Paingor, Elder Zan, Warrior Core. He learned, with a touch of grim irony, that Rovek roughly translated to Stonefist in their tongue, an apt description. He learned that Kayla meant something akin to golden eye, or perhaps more accurately, keen sight. Tentatively, using gestures and his few newly acquired words, he tried to ask about the prominent spiral carving he'd noticed earlier, pointing towards the wall where it was most clearly depicted. Kayla's gaze followed his gesture, but her expression shuddered slightly, becoming guarded. Telka, she said simply, the word meaning something like old story or past thing. She then immediately changed the subject, asking him through gesture about his sky canoe. He tried his best to explain the crash, the distant stars, his home world so incredibly far away. It was clumsy, fragmented communication, pieced together with gestures and broken words. But she listened intently, her sharp mind seeming to grasp the core concepts. He saw in her keen eyes not just curiosity, but perhaps a dawning understanding of the sheer otherness of his existence, the profound isolation he must be feeling. In that shared moment of rudimentary communication, sitting by the flickering blue flames deep beneath the surface of an unfamiliar world, the strange bond between them, born of accident and arcane tradition, shifted subtly. It became something less terrifying, something almost approaching fragile understanding. Modification note, added Evan asking about the symbol again, and Kyla specifically deflecting, creating mystery and reinforcing the twist hint. Shortened description of the language lesson itself slightly. Day 3 dawned, the final day of his trial period. The atmosphere in the cavern felt charged, tense. Everyone knew what lay ahead. The elders had decreed a final test, one that went beyond mere labor or resourcefulness into the realm of spirit and courage. It was a trial designed to push initiates to their absolute limit, the trial of shadows. Boren explained it to Evan, using Kalen, who was becoming surprisingly adept at gestural translation. To bridge the considerable language gap, they were to journey into a specific, avoided region off the forest, a place the Velari called the Grotto of Lost Echoes, where the veil between the physical world and something else, something psychic, terrifyingly ephemeral, was said to be perilously thin. There, they would face the Shadowborn, insubstantial creatures rumored to feed on fear itself, manifesting as horrifying illusions drawn from the deepest recesses of the subject's mind. The goal was not necessarily to fight these manifestations, likely impossible, but to endure them, to confront one's inner demons without breaking, and to return with one's spirit intact before the twin moons reached their zenith. Failure meant madness or death, devoured by one's own fear. Modification note: shortened the description of the trial setup, getting to the point more quickly. A cold dread seeped deep into Evan's bones. Creature stat preyed on fear. What horrors lay buried in his subconscious? Remnants of the crash, the crushing isolation, the faces of loved ones he might never see again. But refusal was not an option. This was the final, unavoidable hurdle. Kayla would accompany him. It wasn't explicitly stated as part of the mandated trial, but her presence felt non-negotiable, an unspoken consequence of the link between them. His failure now would undoubtedly reflect disastrously upon her status and honor. More than that, Evan sensed a deeper, perhaps protective reason, masked be duty. She wouldn't send him into such profound peril alone, regardless of the Elder's decree. Rovek watched them prepare to leave, offering a final, chilling sneer, muttering something venomous under his breath that Evan didn't catch but whose hateful tone was unmistakable. He clearly anticipated, perhaps even hoped for, their failure. Armed with sturdy Velari spears, Evan wielding his awkwardly alongside his laser pistol, and carrying minimal supplies, they left the relative safety of the cavern and plunged back into the emerald twilight of the Velmorran jungle. Kayla moved with heightened alertness, her senses constantly scanning their surroundings, her hand never far from the curved knife at her hip. The forest itself seemed different here, darker somehow, the air heavier, the silence more profound, broken only by unsettling whispers that seemed to ride on the faint breeze rustling the giant leaves. The ubiquitous phosphorescent flora cast longer, more distorted shadows, making familiar shapes seem menacing and strange. As they ventured deeper into the Grotto of Lost Echoes, a palpable sense of deep unease descended like a shroud. The air grew colder, chilling despite the humidity, and a faint, clinging mist swirled around their feet, smelling faintly of decay and something metallic, like old blood. The whispers grew louder, closer, seeming to coalesce into half-heard words just at the edge of perception, fragments of memory, insidious echoes of fear. Evan felt it first as a prickling sensation at the base of his skull, an unnerving psychic static. He saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, the twisted, burning wreckage of the Stardust Drifter, just as he'd last seen it, flames licking hungrily at its hull. He blinked hard, and it was gone, replaced instantly by the oppressive, emerald-lit jungle. Then, he heard it, the frantic, failing alarms from the cockpit, the sickening shriek of tearing metal from the crash. He stumbled, his breath catching raggedly in his throat. "Stay focused, Evan." Kayla's voice cut through the rising panic, low and steady beside him. She hadn't heard or seen what he had, her own trials yet to manifest, but she recognized the signs immediately. They feed on fear, starve them. He nodded tightly, gripping his spear until his knuckles whitened, forcing himself to breathe evenly, rhythmically. But the Shadowborn were just beginning. The mist thickened rapidly, swirling around them, coalescing into indistinct, shifting shapes that seemed to writhe at the edges of his vision. For Kayla, the illusions took a different form. She suddenly growled low in her throat, dropping instantly into a defensive crouch, her sharp eyes fixed intently on a point in the mist ahead. Evan saw nothing but swirling vapor, but she clearly perceived a tangible threat, a monstrous beast from Velari legend, perhaps, or a painful memory of a past hunt gone terribly wrong. Then the illusions turned deeply personal, insidious. Evan saw his parents' faces, etched with worry and fading hope, asking why he hadn't come home, why he'd abandoned them. He saw former colleagues from the Starfarer Corps, their faces cold and accusing, blaming him for the loss of the valuable ship, the failure of the mission. The air filled momentarily with the impossible lesson of earth rain on pavement, the phantom taste of real coffee, poignant, agonizing reminders of everything he had lost, everything irrevocably gone. Each vision, each sensation, was a calculated psychic stab wound designed to break his resolve, to drown him in waves of grief and paralyzing despair. He saw Kayla falter too. A soft whimper escaped her, a sound utterly unlike her usual fierce composure, her wide eyes mirroring a deep, remembered pain. Was she seeing fallen packmates? A betrayal? A profound threat to her clan she felt helpless to prevent? He reached out instinctively, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Kayla, not real. Remember. His touch seemed to anchor her, pulling her back from whatever abyss she'd glimpsed. She shook her head violently, blinking rapidly, the fierce alpha huntress resurfacing in her bright gaze. She looked at him, a flicker of raw gratitude, perhaps surprise, in her eyes. They twist truth, Evan. Fight them. Together. They stood back to back, spears held ready, the low hum of Evan's laser pistol adding a faint technological dissonance to the grotto's oppressive silence. The Shadowborn pressed closer, no longer just fleeting images, but tangible projections of pure terror. Nightmarish creatures, fluid amalgamations of claws, teeth, and shifting darkness, lunged from the roiling mist. Evan fired his laser pistol instinctively, the coherent light beams passing harmlessly through the illusions. Physical attacks were useless. This was solely a battle of will, of spirit. A horrifying shape lunged directly at Kayla, a monstrously distorted image of Rovek, his face contorted in a mask of murderous rage, obsidian spear aimed straight at her heart. She cried out, stumbling back, the potent image clearly tapping into her known rivalry, her potential deep-seated fear of his ambition and brutality. Seeing her distress, Evan reacted without thinking. He threw himself forward, positioning his own body between Kayla and the phantom Rovek, bracing for an impact that never came. The illusion flickered violently against his unexpected, selfless act of protection, an action rooted in something other than fear or self-preservation, and dissolved into harmless vapor. Then, it was Evan's turn for the ultimate fear to manifest. Not just the crash, not just the memories of loss, but absolute, crushing, existential loneliness. The forest dissolved around him instantly, replaced by the infinite, cold, uncaring void of deep space. He was floating, untethered, his ship gone, Velmorra gone, only endless, silent darkness stretching away in every terrifying direction. Absolute panic seized him, cold and suffocating. He was truly, finally lost, alone. Evan, Kayla's voice, sharp and urgent, pierced through the terrifying void like a physical blow. He felt her strong hand grip his arm, pulling him back, anchoring him. The horrifying illusion shattered, the oppressive reality of the emerald forest rushing back into sharp focus. He gasped, drawing in a ragged breath, The feel of the damp earth beneath his feet, the solid, reassuring presence of Kayla beside him, tethering him to reality. They locked eyes for a long moment, a profound, shared understanding passing between them without words. They had glimpsed each other's deepest fears, faced terrifying darkness within themselves and within each other, and had chosen, instinctively, to stand together. The strange bond forged by pure accident was being tempered in the crucible of shared terror, becoming something stronger, something undeniably real. The Shadowborn seemed to recoil from their combined resilience, their ephemeral power waning. The insidious whispers faded, the chilling mist thinned. Looking up through the dense canopy, they could just see the twin moons, pale, ethereal disks in the greenish sky, beginning their slow descent from their zenith. The trial was over. They turned and began the long walk back, leaning heavily on each other for support, utterly exhausted in body and spirit, but crucially unbroken. They had faced the trial of shadows and emerged yet not just victorious, but irrevocably changed. They had survived the physical threats of Velmorra, and now they had endured the psychic onslaught of its deepest shadows, side by side. Whatever came next, they knew. Somehow, they would face it together. Modification note: condensed the trial of shadows description significantly, focusing on the key shared fear moments and the act of saving each other, which strengthens their bond explicitly. Their return to the cavern was met initially with a stunned, heavy silence. Mud-streaked, bone-weary, leaning heavily on each other for physical support. Evan and Kayla staggered back into the cool blue torchlight, just as the last sliver of the twin moons vanished below the perceived horizon. Line Throth waterfall entrance. They had made it. Kaylin let out an involuntary whoop of relief, quickly stifled. Borin nodded slowly, a look of deep, grudging respect finally dawning on his scarred face. Even some of the previously hostile warriors murmured quiet sounds of approval or surprise. Surviving the Grotto of Lost Echoes was a significant feat, even for seasoned Velari warriors. The elders observed their return from the platform, their ancient eyes missing nothing. The silver-haired matriarch studied them both intently, her gaze lingering for a moment on the way Kayla instinctively adjusted her stance to better support Evan's weight, the easy, unconscious familiarity that hadn't been there 3 days prior. But one figure remained entirely unimpressed, his simmering hostility radiating like heat from the central fire. Rovek stepped forward boldly, his powerful voice booming through the suddenly quiet cavern, cutting through the murmurs of relief like a jagged knife. He hides behind the huntress. He survives by her strength, her instinct, not his own. The trial demands proof of worth, proof of spirit, not mere proof of fortunate companionship. He pointed a thick, accusing, clawed finger directly at Evan. The outsider has shown some base cunning, perhaps surprising endurance. But has he shown the spirit of a warrior? The will to stand alone against a true threat? I say he has not earned his place among us. A wave of uncertain agreement rippled through some sections of the gathered crowd, particularly those loyal to Rovkek or inherently suspicious of the alien presence. The sentiment, however unjustly, was clear. Evan had technically passed the prescribed tests, but he hadn't truly proven himself in the way that mattered most to a proud warrior culture: direct, unshielded combat. Rovek turned smoothly to face the elders on their platform. "Elders, I invoke the ancient right of challenge. Let the human face me now, in ritual combat. If he can stand against me, truly stand on his own feet, then perhaps he is worthy of the air he breathes in our home. If not," Rovek grinned predatorily, revealing sharp, menacing fangs, his eyes flicking again towards the prominent ancient carvings depicting Velari's strength and lineage. Then his weakness is proven definitively. This farce of a bond is ended, and other pressing matters, he finished meaningfully, can finally be settled. Modification note. Made Rovkek's motivation in issuing the challenge even clearer, explicitly linking Evan's potential failure to ending the bond and settling other matters related implicitly to lineage status hinted at by the carvings. The cavern fell utterly silent once more, all eyes fixed intently on the elders. Kayla stiffened beside Evan, a low, warning growl rumbling deep in her chest. She started to object, her voice sharp, but the eldest matriarch raised a single, commanding hand, silencing her instantly. The elder looked down solely at Evan, her ancient gaze piercing, seeming to weigh his soul. She spoke, her voice carrying easily throughout the vast space. The challenge, she acknowledged, was irregular, clearly born of Rovek's palpable animosity and likely his own ambition rather than true necessity, according to the original terms set forth. However, the elder conceded thoughtfully. The sentiment Rovek voiced clearly held weight within the clan. Doubt did still linger regarding the outsider's true mettle. The right of challenge, though undeniably brutal, was a traditional, accepted way to resolve such deep disputes and test an individual's core spirit. It would provide the final, undeniable proof the clan seemed implicitly to demand. Therefore, she granted Rovek's challenge. Evan's heart sank like a stone. Ritual combat against Rovek, the massive, brutal Velari warrior who had clearly hated him on sight and now seemed to have deeper, perhaps political, reasons for wanting him gone? He looked down numbly at his still healing leg, felt the bone-deep weariness settling back over him like a shroud after that psychic ordeal in the grotto. He was an engineer, a technician, not a trained soldier or fighter. He realistically stood no chance against Rovek's raw, overwhelming power and lifetimes of experience in Velari combat. Kayla turned to him instantly, her bright eyes blazing with controlled fury directed entirely at Rovek, but softening immediately with deep concern when they met his. Evan, no, she murmured urgently, the Velari word for refusal clear even in his limited understanding. This is not required. Ek telephone, you passed the trials. He looked at her fierce, protective face, then at Rovek's confident, sneering visage, then at the hundreds of expectant Velari eyes surrounding him in the torchlit cavern. He had come this far. He had endured the back-breaking labor, navigated the treacherous tunnels, faced down his own deepest fears in the grotto alongside Kayla. To refuse now would be to validate Rovek's venomous accusations, to admit fundamental weakness, and perhaps worst of all, to potentially shame Kayla Hohad for complex reasons tied to their strange bond, defended his right to try. More than that, a tiny spark of sheer human defiance ignited deep within his exhaustion. He wouldn't be bullied into exile. He wouldn't let Rovek win by default. He deliberately straightened his shoulders, consciously pushing away slightly from Kayla's supportive presence, standing as tall as he possibly could on his injured leg. He met the elder matriarch's impassive gaze first, then locked eyes directly with Rovek. Using the Velari words Kayla had painstakingly taught him, spoken haltingly but clearly across the sudden silence, he said firmly, I accept. Challenge. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Rovek looked momentarily taken aback, clearly having expected a refusal he could exploit. Then his grin widened into a truly predatory leer. He had perhaps hoped to win by default. Now, he would have the distinct pleasure of crushing the presumptuous human himself. Kayla looked at Evan, shock warring visibly with a fierce, unexpected pride in her striking expression. She gave him a single, sharp, accepting nod. She understood his decision, respected it, even if she feared its outcome. The ritual combat was set for the next period of low light, allowing both combatants a brief time to rest and prepare. Evan retreated numbly to his pile of furs, his mind racing frantically. How could he possibly win? Brute force was utterly out of the question. Rovek outweighed him significantly and possessed natural weaponry Evan couldn't hope to match. Speed? His injured leg made swift evasion incredibly difficult. Endurance? He was already running on near-empty fumes after the trial of shadows. It had to be strategy, intelligence, using Rovek's known arrogance and aggression against him somehow. Kayla came to him shortly after, bringing not Bandagestes time, but vital knowledge. She spoke quietly, urgently, using a mix of Velari words he now understood and expressive gestures, describing Rovek's typical fighting style, powerful, brutally direct, relying on overwhelming charges and heavy, bone-jarring blows. He strongly favored his right side, she noted carefully, a lingering weakness from an old shoulder injury, sustained years ago in a territorial dispute. He was immensely strong, she emphasized, but lacked finesse and could sometimes be goaded into reckless overconfidence. She quickly showed Evan basic Velari blocking techniques, not designed to stop Rovek's force head-on, but to redirect it. She pointed out how to use the terrain of the designated combat circle, a wide, sandy area near the back of the cavern, to his potential advantage. She also gave him a traditional Velari fighting staff, shorter and much thicker than the spear he had carried earlier, weighted purposefully at both ends. Dask, she instructed firmly, tapping the staff, then her own head. Balance. Momentum. Nizral, Azral. Not strength against strength. Use his own force against him. As the designated time approached, the entire clan gathered silently around the wide combat circle, the flickering blue torchlight casting long, dancing, distorted shadows. The air crackled with anticipation. Rovek strode confidently into the circle, hefting a massive, brutal-looking club embedded with jagged shards of black volcanic glass. He roared, pounding his massive chest demonstratively, playing to the crowd, radiating sheer confidence and barely contained bloodlust. Evan took a deep, steadying breath, gripped the smooth wood of the fighting staff tightly, and limped resolutely into the circle opposite Rovek. He looked small, injured, impossibly outmatched by comparison. Murmurs of doubt, even flickers of pity, rippled through the onlookers. Only Kayla's steady gaze, fixed intently upon him from the edge of the crowd, held unwavering belief. The elder matriarch raised her staff and gave the sharp, guttural signal to begin. Rovek charged immediately, exactly as Kayla had predicted, roaring like a force of nature, his massive club raised high for a crushing, decisive blow. Evan didn't try foolishly to meet the charge head-on. Remembering Kayla's urgent advice, he used the heavy staff not to block, but to deflect, planting own end firmly on the packed sand, just as Rovek committed to his swing. He angled the staff sharply upward, catching the descending club near its head, and using Rovek's own powerful momentum to redirect its lethal force sideways, away from him. The impact jarred his arms painfully, vibrating up to his shoulders, but Rovek, clearly expecting solid resistance or a desperate dodge, stumbled past him, carried forward by the sheer force of his missed blow. A surprised ripple of murmurs went through the watching crowd. Rovek snarled, angered, and perhaps slightly embarrassed at being evaded so easily by the frail-looking human. He spun quickly, swinging the heavy club in a wide, dangerous horizontal arc. Evan ducked low instinctively, the lethal weapon whistling menacingly through the air just inches above his head. He used the brief opportunity, while Rovek was slightly off balance from the sweeping swing, to jab the weighted end of his staff hard into Rovek's heavily muscled thigh, near the knee joint. Not a truly damaging blow against the Velari's thick hide and muscle, but certainly painful and, more importantly, unexpected. Rovek howled in pure frustration and charged again, more furiously this time, abandoning any pretense of measured combat. Evan knew he couldn't keep this up for long. He continued his desperate strategy: evade when possible, deflect when necessary, use Rovek's mounting aggression against him. He moved constantly, despite the fire in his leg, using quick pivots and short, jerky dodges learned from watching Velari spars, forcing Rovek to expend precious energy chasing him, swinging his heavy club wildly. He took several glancing blows on the staff, feeling the heavy shock resonate through the wood into his bones, but managed crucially to avoid any direct, disabling hits. He was tiring rapidly now, the sharp agony in his leg a constant, screaming fire, but Rovek was also beginning to pant visibly, sweat darkening the thick fur around his neck, his initial arrogance clearly curdling into visible, raw frustration. "Stand and fight, sky rat coward," Rovek bellowed, lunging forward again, swinging his club recklessly, leaving himself momentarily open. Evan saw his only chance, a split-second opening created by Rovek's frustration. Rovek was overextending again, favoring his right side heavily, just as Kayla had indicated. As Rovek lunged forward for another powerful downward swing, Evan didn't dodge away this time. Instead, he moved towards the attack, ducking swiftly under Rovek's thick arm. In one fluid, desperate motion practiced only mentally, he swept the lower end of his heavy staff low across the sand, catching Rovek cleanly behind both ankles. Simultaneously, leveraging his position, he pushed hard with his shoulder against Rovek's exposed, slightly weaker right side, using the Velari warrior's own considerable forward momentum against him. Thrown completely off balance, his feet swept from under him, the massive Rove crashed heavily backwards onto the sandy ground, with a surprised grunt of expelled air. The huge obsidian club flew from his grasp, landing harmlessly several feet away. Before Rovek could even begin to recover his wits or scramble for his weapon, Evan pressed his advantage instantly. Ignoring the searing, protesting agony flaring through his own injured leg, he stepped forward quickly and planted the smooth, heavy end of his fighting staff firmly, but pointedly on Rovek's broad, heaving chest, pinning him securely to the ground. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. He simply held him there, staff pressed firmly, meeting the warrior's furious, utterly disbelieving gaze. The entire cavern was utterly silent. Everyone stared, astonished into immobility. The huge, powerful Rovek, Stone Fist himself, champion of many tribal contests, lay pinned beneath the simple wooden staff wielded by the injured, exhausted human outsider. Evan held Rovek's furious, humiliated gaze. He was trembling with adrenaline and sheer exhaustion, his muscles screaming. Booth's grip on the staff was steady, unwavering. He had won, not through strength, but through strategy, resilience, observation, and the unexpected courage to stand his ground when retreat seemed the only logical option. Slowly, deliberately, breathing heavily, Evan spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the profound silence. "Kel, yield?" It was one of the first Velari words Kayla had taught him related to conflict resolution. Rovek stared up at him, trapped, defeated, utterly humiliated before the entire clan. His powerful chest heaved under the staff. After a long, tense, pregnant moment, he finally gave a single, almost imperceptible, grudging nod. He yielded. Evan removed the staff immediately, stepping back carefully, nearly collapsing from the sudden release off tension and the overwhelming wave of exhaustion. A wave of astonishing sound erupted instantly from the assembled crowd. Shouts, amazed cheers, warriors pounding the butts of their spears rhythmically against the ground in a traditional Velari salute of respect. Kalen was jumping up and down Nirth Edge, letting out unrestrained whoops. Even Boren, the grizzled veteran, was actually visibly smiling. Evan looked towards Kayla. Her brilliant amber eyes shone brightly with pride, profound relief, and something deeper, something intensely personal, and perhaps protective. She pushed swiftly through the now cheering crowd and came directly to his side, immediately offering her strong arm for support without a word. He leaned on her gratefully, his legs threatening to buckle. The elder matriarch stepped forward from the platform, her ancient face impassive as ever, but her sharp old eyes held an unmistakable spark of deep approval. She looked directly at Evan, then addressed the still buzzing clan. The outsider, Evan Cross, has faced the trials. He has worked, he has endured, he has faced the shadows alongside our huntress, and now he has stood against the ready of challenge and prevailed through spirit, not just strength. He has proven his mettle, his heart. She paused, letting her words sink in fully. He is Evan Cross of the Velari. Let it be known. The clan roared its thunderous assent, a wave of acceptance washing over Evan. Rovek climbed slowly, stiffly to his feet, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone, defeated but perhaps, finally, carrying a hard-won sliver of grudging respect for the human who had bested him not with claws and fury, but with unexpected cunning and sheer tenacity. Evan had done it. He had survived the trials, won the challenge, and earned his precarious place. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was, somehow, improbably, one of them. And beside him, Kayla's strong, supportive presence felt less like an obligation of ancient tradition and more like a true partnership, forged unexpectedly in shared fire and shadow. Several nights later, under the ethereal double light of Velmorra's twin moons casting silvery, shifting patterns across the jungle canopy visible from the cavern mouth, the formal binding ceremony took place. This wasn't about the rushed, confused bonding implied by Evan's accidental touch, but a formal, conscious affirmation of the link, acknowledged and witnessed by the entire clan. The central fire burned low, casting warm, dancing shadows on the intricately carved walls depicting millennia of Velari history and myth. The air was thick and still, with the scent of ceremonial incense, a fragrant mix of aromatic woods and dried psychotropic herbs that was strangely calming. The Velari clan gathered around, their usual rough demeanor replaced with a palpable quiet reverence. Evan stood beside Kayla near the fire, no longer clad in the remnants of his tattered enviro suit, but wearing simple, practical garments woven from soft, dark native fibers, gifts from the clan weavers. His leg, though still healing, felt significantly stronger, supported by an articulated brace expertly crafted for him by Boren himself. The elder matriarch presided, her voice a low, resonant chant that seemed to vibrate with the very stone around them. She spoke of the ancient laws, of bonds formed not just by accidental touch or spoken word, but by shared experience, demonstrated mutual respect, and the deliberate weaving together of spirits according to profound tradition. She carefully recounted Evan's unlikely journey, the fiery crash from Theski, the grueling trials of adaptation, the terrifying confrontation in the Grotooth Lost Echoes, the unexpected victory in the rite of challenge. framing it not merely as a test imposed upon an outsider, but as the unexpected forging of a new, unprecedented link in the clan's long, unbroken chain. She called forth Kaelin, now looking at Evan with open admiration, who presented a shallow ceremonial bowl carved from luminous, subtly pulsating moonwood. Inside was a thick paste made from crushed glowing flower petal sand, sacred river clay. The elder dipped her aged fingers into the cool paste and, chanting softly, drew intricate symbols on Kayla's high forehead and pronounced cheekbones. Ancient symbols representing the huntress lineage, clan strength, unwavering loyalty. Kayla closed her eyes briefly, accepting the ritual marking with solemn, quiet grace. Then, the elder matriarch turned her piercing gaze upon Evan. Her ancient eyes held no lingering judgment, only a deep, assessing acceptance. She dipped her fingers into the paste again. Evan instinctively braced himself, expecting alien, perhaps overwhelming patterns. Instead, she hesitated for just a moment. Then, with surprising gentleness and perhaps a touch of unforeseen compassion, drew simpler, clearer lines on his forehead. A circle, perhaps representing wholeness or the distant stars he came from, intersected cleanly by a single strong verticolin, signifying connection, integration, belonging. It felt like a symbol created just for him, acknowledging his unique origins while formally integrating him into their world. As she completed the vertical line, however, her fingers lingered for an extra moment, pressing slightly, a subtle emphasis hinting at the weight and permanence of this connection. Modification note: added the subtle emphasis from the elder during the marking, hinting again at the link's deeper significance next. It was Kayla Woe took the bowl from the elder. Her gaze met Evan's across the flickering firelight, serious yet softened by a warmth that hadn't been there just days before. The fierce intensity he had first perceived as purely predatory now clearly held understanding, mutual respect, and an undeniable, unwavering choice. This was no longer merely fulfilling an accident of ancient culture. It was a deliberate step they were now taking together, before her entire people. She dipped her own long fingers into the paste and, with infinite care, mirrored the elder's unique gesture, precisely tracing the lines the elder had drawn on his forehead. Her touch was firm, but surprisingly gentle, sealing the marking, sealing the bond with conscious intent. Then it was Evan's turn. His hand was slightly unsteady as he took the moonwood bowl. He looked at Kayla, at the ancient complex symbols now adorning her proud, strong features. He took a deep breath, dipped his fingers into the cool, slightly tingling paste, and carefully, respectfully, traced the intricate Velari markings on her forehead and cheeks, his touch attempting to convey the profound respect, the gratitude, and the burgeoning, unexpected affection he felt for this fierce, noble being who had saved him, challenged him, guided him, and ultimately stood steadfastly by him against her own kin. When the markings were complete in both of them, the elder matriarch presented them with a single, intricately woven cord, dyed in deep shades of forest green and midnight blue, symbolizing the earth and sky, perhaps. Kar Velkash, she chanted, her voice echoing slightly in the now silent cavern. A bond shared is a strength doubled. Two spirits, one path. Together, following the elder's precise guidance, Evan and Kayla took the ends of the cord. They looped and tied it together in a complex, secure knot around their joined wrists, his scarred human hand now clasped firmly within her larger, furred, clawed one. The knot felt tight, secure, unbreakable, symbolizing the unique connection they now formally acknowledged before the assembled clan. It felt not like a chain binding them, but a free Lycosan link connecting their disparate worlds. The ceremony concluded not with continued solemn silence, but with a sudden, joyous outburst of communal celebration. Deep, powerful drums began to beat a primal, compelling rhythm that seemed to resonate within Evan's very bones. Velari warriors whooped and cheered, stamping their feet in approval. Large woven platters laden high with sizzling roasted meats, piles of exotic jewel-toned fruits, and steaming mounds of baked tubers were brought out from cooking alcoves. Deep wooden goblets were filled to the brim with a pungent, fermented, mildly intoxicating beverage made from specially cultivated glowing fungi. Evan found himself unexpectedly swept up in the vibrant, almost overwhelming celebration. Warriors who had previously glared at him with open hostility now clapped him soundly on the back in camaraderie. Even Rovik, from across the fire pit, offered a single, gruff, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Perhaps not friendship, but a silent truce declared, honor satisfied. Kalen grinned broadly, raising his goblet high in enthusiastic salute. Borin, joining them later, shared a rambling story of a legendary hunt, using expansive gestures that Evan found he could mostly follow, punctuated by deep laughs from the surrounding Velari. He was surrounded, accepted, suddenly part of the fierce, vibrant, intensely alive pulse of the Velari clan. Later, as the main festivities swirled on within the deeper cavern, Evan and Kayla found themselves standing together near the wide entrance, looking out past the shimmering waterfall curtain at the moonlit jungle. The sounds of the drums and laughter faded slightly behind them, replaced by the soft, continuous chirping and rustling symphony of the Velmorran night. "You are Velari now, Evan Cross," Kayla said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, deep satisfaction. She lightly touched the woven ceremonial cord still securely binding their wrists together. He looked at her profile outlined against the moonlit forest, the silver light catching the brilliant amber of her eyes, illuminating the innate strength and predatory grace in her silhouette. He thought of the utterly impossible journey that had brought him to this exact moment. The fiery terror of the crash, the gnawing desperation of survival, the bewildering shock of their first meeting, the grueling, spirit-testing trials, the pervasive fear, the constant physical distress, and then the utterly unexpected connection forged between them. He had crash-landed on a wild, lethal world, expecting only a brutal fight for basic existence. He had found something infinitely more complex, more demanding, and perhaps more rewarding. "I am," he agreed, his own voice thick with unexpected emotion. He looked out at the incredible panorama of the alien jungle, no longer seeing just latent danger, but also profound beauty, ancient mystery, a place that was, impossibly, starting to feel like home. He still missed Earth profoundly, the familiar stars, the life he had known. But here, standing beside this incredible, fierce woman, now formally accepted among this loyal, albeit intimidating, clan, he had stumbled upon something he hadn't even known he was searching for back among the stars: purpose, connection, belonging, perhaps even the fragile beginnings of love. He gently squeezed her hand, the one still intrinsically linked to his by the binding cord. "Thank you, Kayla," he said simply, "for everything." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder for a moment, a gesture of quiet trust and nascent affection that spoke volumes more than any words they yet shared. "We walk the path together now, Evan." Then she straightened slightly, pulling back just enough to meet his gaze directly, her expression turning serious, the weight of her next words evident. "But understand, the spirit link you initiated. It is more than mere acceptance into the clan. It binds you irrevocably to my lineage, Evan." My bloodline carries an ancient duty, a profound guardianship tied intrinsically to this world's deepest, oldest secrets. Secrets that spiral symbol. She nodded subtly back towards the cavern interior, where the ancient carving dominated the main wall, represents. It is a burden, Evan, not just an honor. A burden Rovek surely coveted, hoping to seize control of that power and duty through my defeat. Or yours, had you fallen in the right. She met his gaze squarely, her luminous eyes holding his. Touching my ear, it didn't just choose me as your protector according to law, Evan. The ancient magic of the link chose you to share this burden with me. We do not know what awakening this link between Velari and outsider might trigger. It may call forth dormant powers within this world, or draw attention from ancient dangers long sleeping in the heart of Velmorra. Her hand tightened on his almost unconsciously, a subtle tension now underlying the connection, our path together. It holds great promise, Evan. But it also holds peril we do not yet understand. Are you truly ready for that? Modification note. Expanded Kayla's explanation of the twist significantly. Directly linked it again to the carving and Rovek's ambition. Specified the nature of the burden guardianship, ancient duty, dormant powers, ancient dangers. Explicitly stated the link chose him too for the burden, not just her as protector. Added a final question, leaving a gentle but clear open thread about future challenges without undermining the present resolution. The drums pulsed steadily within the great cavern, a vibrant heartbeat against the alien night. The blue firelight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with both celebration and untold secrets. Bound by ritual, shared trial, and unfolding mystery, the starship engineer and the Alpha Huntress faced the uncertain future together. Evan Cross had found his place among the Velari, but the true price of belonging, woven into the ancient magic of the spirit link and the deep, guarded secrets of Velmorra, was only beginning to unfold. His journey hadn't ended with acceptance. In many ways, intrinsically linked now to Kayla and the heart of this ancient world, it was truly just beginning.